So now we're going to look at how to graphically look at qualitative data. Remember, qualitative data is the data that is categorical, that is a label of some kind. So let's do some vocabulary. The frequency of a category is the number of times it occurs in the data set. A frequency distribution and excuse the the wrist cast if this is at a later date. Suppose a retailer accepts 4 types of credit cards and lists the types used by the last 50 customers. First off, that is not a random sample, but we're going to go with it. Construct a frequency distribution for each type of credit card. So frequency just means the number of times it occurs. So we would go through and count how many times they occur. One way to do that is to do little quick tally marks as we go through. So let me kind of zoom out a little bit. I'm going to just go through the list and tally as I go. So Discover, Visa, American Express, Visa, MasterCard, Visa, Visa, MasterCard, 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 Visa, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Visa, American Express, Visa, American Express, Discover, Discover, and so forth. American Express, MasterCard, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Visa, Discover, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, Discover, MasterCard, MasterCard, Visa, Visa, Visa. So we end up with 11 for MasterCard, 23, 9, and 7. This is what we consider a frequency distribution. Now we can also look at the relative frequency. A frequency distribution displays exactly how many observations are in each category. But sometimes we are interested in the proportion instead, or the percentage. The proportion of observations in a category is called the relative frequency. And that's just found by taking the frequency of the category divided by the sum of all the frequencies. So let's take that credit card data. The MasterCard was 11. Visa was 23. American Express was 9. And Discover was 7. So if I add those all up, I'll get the sum of all the frequencies. That'd be 50. And that should match how many people they were surveying. So that works out good. Now, our relative frequency is going to be our frequency divided by the sum. So 11 out of 50. which is going to be 0.22, 23 out of 50, that's 0.46, 9 out of 50, that's 0.18, and 7 out of 50, that's 0.14. Now, these could also be thought of as percentages: 22%, 46%, 18%, and 14%. Now, graphically, we can take this data and look at it. The first type is a bar graph. And there's some key features I want to point out about a bar graph. First off, it's a graphical representation, and we have rectangles of equal width. So these are the same width, and one rectangle for each category. The heights represent either the frequency or the relative frequency. So here's our bar graph, and notice that they're separate bars for MasterCard, Visa, American Express, and Discover. And the height goes to the frequency. So 11, 23, 9, and 7. You can also do the relative frequencies: 0.22, 0.46, 0.18, 0.14. Now, one thing I want you to notice, look at the similarities. They're basically identical except for the scale on the vertical bar, on the vertical axis. Now, sometimes it's desirable to construct a bar graph in which the categories are presented in order of frequency or relative frequency, such as this, starting with the largest and going down. Sometimes that's a better way to look at it. That type of graph is called a Pareto chart. It helps us see which categories are most frequently occurring. We can also represent a bar graph horizontally. So we can have them vertical or horizontal. This is convenient when the names of the categories are really long. So looking at the employment of US residents, but we can still see which one is the most. That'd be about 0.38. We can see which one is the smallest. That's really small, the farming and forestry and fishing. But we can see it really clearly whether it's vertical or horizontal. Now, if we wanted to compare two bar graphs that have the same categories, the best way is to do what is called a side-by-side. So in this bar graph, we have the categories Facebook, Gmail, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And what it's showing is the frequency in millions, how many active users we have in each of those categories. Now, what they're comparing is the data from 2015, which is shown in tan, and the data from 2016, which is shown in blue. And notice that those are side by side when you're comparing, but the categories themselves are separated out. Another way we can look at qualitative data is with a pie chart. A pie chart is another way of looking at our frequencies, or our relative frequencies, actually. It's a circle divided into sectors, one for each category, and the relative size of the sectors match the relative frequencies. For example, if a category has a relative frequency of 0.25, then its sector takes up 1/4 of the circle. Or if the whole circle is 360 degrees, this would be 90 degrees of the circle. So here's our relative frequencies, and we can see that 46%, we do 46% of 360 to figure out the size of the sector. So you would take each of these times 360, and get the size. So if I do 0.22 times 360, I get 79 degrees. 0.46 times 360 is 166 degrees on the circle. 0.18 times 360 is 65 degrees. And 0.14 times 360 would be 50 degrees. So that's how we would know how to measure our degrees if we were doing it by hand. And those are the main ways you will see qualitative data.